Hello everybody and welcome to a very special episode of my Kerbal Space Program videos. We need to leave Kerbal, we need to leave our home. Yes, we are going on an Ekksodus. Written with 2K and an S, by the way. This here is appropriately named the Ekksodus 1, and it is going to deliver, well, quite a lot of stuff actually to Jool. Yes, we're going to the green pearl of the Kerbal system. And what you're seeing here, of course, is the usual ascent. We're going to drop a lot of tanks because we're going to have to put a lot of ship into orbit. How much ship? Well, this thing here is almost 800 parts when in orbit, and it weighs almost 1460 tons, without the larger stuff, of course. What's behind that big fairing? Well, you're going to see that once we exit the upper atmosphere. And while we ascend, let's enjoy some beautiful stage separations. Goodbye, little tanks. You've served us well. Alright, what else can I tell you about this? Well, there is this habitat section you see up front. It is of course shaped like a ring. No, it does not move because that would have been very tedious to implement. However, this thing here offers space for up to 288 Kerbals, science labs not counted. And while we enjoy a nice flyby of the Ekksodus 1, let me tell you that we have to do a lot once we get to Jool. This is going to be quite a complicated mission. And here we separate a fairing and boom! Yeah, I kind of miscalculated how the fairing would separate and where the booster would end up after I built it. But since we're going to discard those anyway and they're now space trash, well, let's not worry about that, shall we? Of course, we need some power when we go to another planet. This here is using solar panels. I also have some nuclear generators somewhere in here, but they are not for the main ship. I usually tend to avoid nuke generators when using Kerbal-rated ships, so to speak. Why I then use nuclear engines, I don't know, but yeah. Anyhow, after that nice little time warp montage, it is time to fire our engines towards Jool. And that's what we're going to do right about now. Keen-eyed viewers may have noticed that I have switched up my usual 7 nuke cluster design a bit. Usually I put the nuke directly on a cubic octagonal strut and then put that on one of those Mark III adapter tanks. However, this time I have put the nukes on some liquid fuel tanks and then radially attached them to the Mark III adapter. The effect of that was that I no longer need any radiators to perform any burns with any nuclear engine setup. Because the heat dissipation of that little tiny 1.25 meter fuel tanks is really good apparently. Anyhow, we have now arrived at Jool and it is now time to get into a stable orbit. In order to do that, we're going to have a Jool, what am I saying? Tylo flyby, and we're going to use the gravity of Jool's largest moon to get into a stable orbit. So here we go, we're doing our flyby, and right about now we're going to do our burn to get into our desired orbit. Thanks for gravity assists! You have already noticed there's a little flyer on top, a little space plane. So this is going to be my Laythe shuttle. What do I mean with Laythe shuttle? You're going to see that a little bit later on in that video. Alright, once we've done some orbital maneuvering, it is time for a visual inspection of the Ekksodus 1 and all of its attached parts. For this, of course, we need an engineer, because engineers are good at engineering stuff. What engineers are also good at is, of course, getting more ore out of the surface of a planetary body. So that's what we're going to leverage in a bit. And in order to do that, we're going to have to put that little Kerbal into another vehicle that is attached at the bottom of the Ekksodus 1. So this is going to be the home for this little fellow for the next, well, at least days. There you go, get in there. Alright, now it's time to do some other stuff. In order for our refinery stuff to really find some ore, we need, of course, an ore scanner, and that's what I just attached to it, and now we're separating the mining facility. Yes, this looks good. We have a clean separation, and now we're heading, of course, to Pole. The moon with the lowest gravity, I think. No, Gilly, of course, has less gravity, but it has very low gravity, and it is really easy to get onto the surface and back up into the atmosphere. Atmosphere? What am I talking about? I mean orbit, of course. Now, let's separate that probe and use it to scan for resources. Now this looks good. We have a lot of ore on Pole. And of course I limited to the highest concentration. And there we're going to land our mobile refinery. So this here is designed to really have barely enough thrust-to-weight ratio to get off from Pole and into orbit when that big S3 tank is filled to the brim with fuel. And we have our first accident and lose our comm array. Not good. This could have potential drawbacks when we want to control this remotely without any Kerbal on board. However, since we have our engineer in here, we're fine. Okay, let's get to a nice spot to get some fuel. And we're extending the drills, and now we also need some radiators, because that refinery, of course, creates some heat. Alright, I've skipped ahead a bit through time, because this, of course, takes some time to get that fuel refined. Meanwhile, the Ekksodus 1 is still on its orbit towards its next maneuver node, so you can imagine this is a very long orbit. And as you can see here, it takes quite some time to take off from Pole, even though it has low gravity. So yeah, you can imagine how closely that was calculated. So this is just a very quick cut of getting fuel to that orbital depot. It can carry 3 times the capacity of that refinery, so I had to get up there 3 times, of course. Then I had to get up there 2 more times to fill up the shuttles, but more on that later. Alright, what do we need else in order to establish a self-sustaining colony? We have to stay in touch, we have to communicate. Let's assume what is going to happen when the CommNet of Kerbin fails. So we set up our own CommNet, and in order to do that I have set up some satellites in a polar orbit around Jool, and you see that here in a nice little montage I made just for you. Since it's basically 4 times almost the same maneuver, I thought why show it in sequence and not show it in parallel. And here we are finalizing all of our orbits, and this is how it looks like. Well, I think we are now in the green. So, we are now almost at our perihaps, which means we have to drop another thing. As I mentioned before, what happens if the comm relay of Kerbin fails? Well, then we don't have any connection to Kerbin anymore, and we can't control our remotely controlled stuff. But how can we ensure that we can control the remotely controlled stuff if there is no controller nearby? Well, that's where this thing comes in. This nice little Star Wars type looking shuttle thing is basically my Comm Controller. it is consisting of a crew module with 2 pilots and a relay. And this enables me to control everything in the influence of Jool without any contact to Kerbal, should I so desire. Alright, we have now a stable orbit around Laythe, and while we wait there we can now circularize our Comm Controller. And I decided to put it smack in the middle between Tylo and Laythe. So yeah, we have a crew capsule on there as well, so that our crew does not step on their toes too much. And look at that, that is a nice sunrise on Laythe, or in orbit above Laythe. So now let's separate some stuff. We have to get rid of the jet first before we can deploy our habitat. There we go, and this is some really oddly satisfying visual, if you ask me. Nice! If you like things like that, please subscribe to my channel, you will see more of this, and also leave a like on this video. Thank you! Anyhow, what I'm going to do now is grab some crew from that station and deliver it to the surface, because we already have infrastructure on there. But what is this? It seems I miscalculated how far my jet is able to get in there. Well, fortunately enough, I have some more docking ports. So yeah, but this is not really comfortable to perform, and it also looks a bit awkward, to be honest. Yeah, but in the end I managed to dock, so we're fine. Okay, while we have managed to do that, let's refill the Ekksodus and also the station, because the station, the habitat station, will also serve as a fuel depot for my Laythe shuttle. So once it gets into orbit, it can refuel and then get back down to the surface. Alright, and that's where my fuel shuttles from Paul come in. There we go, we've separated the first and we've separated the second, and both are on its way, on their way of course, to Laythe. I spared you some tedious maneuvering, and yeah, we're now all there. We're right at Laythe. At my first attempt I tried some aero braking, but that ended really badly. So once I was already circularized, I could use the atmosphere to safely slow down my orbital velocity and get in a more circular orbit. Speaking of circular, there is my circular habitat station. Oh, those nice segues, aren't they fun? Alright, and once we have dumped our fuel into those tanks, which are acting as spokes for my habitat, we are heading back to Paul to refill and wait for further instructions. Well, not wait for further instructions, we have to refuel the Ekksodus 1. So yeah, this was quite some tedious work I had to do, because I had to deliver a lot of fuel to a lot of ship. And yeah, I cut a lot of that out of this video, because otherwise you would fall asleep, and I don't want that. Alright, second fuel delivery performed. And we're heading back to Paul, and are already at the fuel depot. There we go. And then we're going to dock the second one once it has arrived. Yes, the tanks on the outside of the shuttle are meant only as fuel for the 2 nuclear engines, and the tank in the middle is of course the payload. But we are now back at Laythe, and what we're going to do now is some crew rotation. If you remember one of my previous videos, I put a sea base on Laythe, and yes, it is still there, and 4 or 5 Kerbals are still there. For years now, to be honest. It is time for them to get some fresh air, fresh recycled air in an artificial habitat in space. Also, some other guys want to experience the soft beaches of Laythe and the beautiful sunrises, so we have some crew rotation going on here. There it is, there's my Laythe base. Hi base. Okay, and I really should have included some drogue chutes or air brakes to brake quicker. After quite some long run back, to be honest, because that braking took its time. Look at that! That is a beautiful sunset. Alright, hello base, nice to see you, and my swimming sky car is also here, amphibious sky car. Now this is an interesting phenomenon. I was wondering why everything looks so dim and the ocean behaves so weird, then I realized we're having an eclipse. Tylo has moved its big butt in front of the sun. And thanks to some visual mods we can experience that in all of its glory. Once that little moon has passed, we now have better visibility. And what I'm doing here is sliding into the water and docking at one of the claw, which of course makes it easier for transferring the crew. That's what we're doing now. Another nice thing is that Laythe Sea Base also has a small refinery on board. Well, not really a small one, it has the big ISRU. And I can refuel my plane here as well. Alright, but once we grabbed our crew from the sea base, we're going to get up to the space base. And since this plane is also capable of reaching orbit of Kerbin, it was really easy to get it into Laythe's orbit, since Laythe's gravity is a bit lower and its atmosphere is not as high. Speaking of high base. So since this docking maneuver was too tedious, if you remember one of my last videos, I sent up something to Laythe, and this is the reason why I wanted to have the correct method of docking to this station, since now the opening in the middle is useless and I didn't want it to be useless. So what we're getting now is an adapter, and yes, I've just put that weird video with 160 days travel to Laythe out there just to show you I put a docking adapter to Laythe with really weird means. Alright, here we are at our ion ship and we're going to grab that payload. First of all, we reduce those solar panels, we retract those solar panels so we don't break them. There we go, we have docked and we have released, and that nice little stump is now coming with us. What I realized here after undocking from that ion thing was that the small tank on top of the docking port is full. If I had emptied that before launching from Kerbin, I would have had even more Delta V, but yeah, that's how it is. Alright, and finally we have really completed our habitat, and the docking mechanism doesn't look that better. This is nice. Really nice. But this video isn't over. For our colonists, a surprise was waiting. Right in the shadowy depths of Pole, an unknown ship rose into orbit. What could it be? Who could it be? Let's wait and see. It's Jebediah Kerman! If you remember from the Halloween special, that little rascal Bob left him to die on Bob. But Jeb, he is a pioneer of spacefaring, and he is a tough cookie and a tough Kerbin. So he managed to survive on Bob on dead Kraken meat and just his willpower alone, and finally made it back once he realized another ship from Kerbin has arrived. So you can imagine how angry Jeb might be, and what might await Bob once Jeb returns to Kerbin. Speaking of returning to Kerbin, we're already on our return trajectory, you can see that here. And here we are, home sweet home. Now for the usual fare of retrograde burning, so we get our capture around Kerbin. Here we go. It's still a bit elliptical, so I had some more burns and some more burns, and the final adjustment made me circular really fine about our home planet. Ooh, let me tell you, Bob is about to get it real good. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Also, you can watch one of the 2 cool videos shown on the right. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.